Hello everybody, welcome to another Inkarnate live stream. My name's Mati. Today we're going to be creating ruins. That means we're going to be breaking some stuff. Who doesn't like a little bit of destruction, a little bit of demolition, right? Basically we're going to be showing you a process on how to either you can break buildings that you've already made for already existing structures on battle maps, or if you want to just start from scratch. Okay, so hey, super exciting, right? A little bit of destruction. Everyone needs a little bit in their life. There's enough chaos out there, right? Okay, I don't really have a whole lot for announcements, just one real quick announcement, and it's not much. Just go up to the bell up in the corner. We just did some bug fixes, not a whole lot. Just check that bell in the top right-hand corner. It's going to be that middle icon out of the three. You're going to notice that we did these improvements, just some QoL kind of stuff to really help out. That's the only announcement that I really have. Oh. And all right, let's go ahead and jump in. You're going to have to clone and edit this map. You can find that link to the map in the chat. If you're watching on YouTube, you can, of course, catch it in the video description. Hey, Beatrix, I'm so glad that you're here. Awesome. Some familiar faces. We have a great Discord community, and some faces here, some mentors who are really, really helpful. If you ever get a chance, please join our Discord. Everyone is so helpful, and it's really going to boost your map making ability. So don't forget to go ahead and check out our Discord. All right, so we're going to be creating ruins. We're going to be destroying some stuff. Now, for those of you who already have a building that they want to destroy, you can go ahead and pull that map up, or we can just start from scratch. And from scratch is the way that we're going to be doing it in this one. And as always, we're going to go ahead and start with talking about what the process is. Usually when you're making a map, you want to have some kind of process and order of operation that makes making maps easier, but also you can make maps quicker, because if you're out there making maps, or if you're a DM, it's nice to have a method or a process that's really going to speed up the map making process, because you're trying to make as many as possible, all kinds of stuff like that. So it's really helpful to have a process to help you to speed it up, because you don't have, 12 days to make a map. You only got maybe a couple days. There's a campaign coming up and you've got to do a session with your players. You might not have enough time. So this process is to help speed it up and to make your maps also look nice. Okay, so the first step in the process is always to have a little bit of planning. Okay, planning is necessary. So I'll push this over to the side, and I'm going to start with the diagram first. A diagram is really, really helpful when you want to kind of put together an idea of what you're working with, because sometimes working from pure memory or your mind or mental image can be kind of frustrating. So having an image to help you out or a reference is helpful. So I've made this kind of side view diagram, and what we're going to do is we're going to be creating a ruin inside of a forest. And it's so iconic to have ruins in forested areas or in the desert or whatever, but I'm going to be choosing the forest area, and we're going to make a temple. So the first thing that I like to think about is, well, where is this going to take place? It was that forest. And what is the building going to be? It's a temple. And it's nice to have a little bit of a backstory about the ruin that you have too. So it's nice to kind of figure out, like, how did it get destroyed? What's the history of it? What's it currently used as? Is it used as a bandit's hideout? Is it a place where someone's been kidnapped? Think about these kind of things when you have your ruin, and that way you have some history to tell your players, or to make something interesting, and to always tie it in a little bit with the main story arc, because ruins are just so much fun. It's really nice to see nature reclaim human spaces, so that's really nice. So now what you normally do is if you don't already have a building that you want to break and you want to start from scratch like we are, it's nice to have kind of a visual about what I want it to look like broken. This is what it looks like finished. But if I go into my diagram and I go ahead and click this ruin group, you can kind of see in the red what our ruins are kind of look like. So you're going to have entire spaces are going to be missing. The ceiling's going to be completely gone, and these kind of things. And I'll show you how to make it to where you can show how there's gaps in a wall and where to put rubble and the whole works. So it's going to be pretty fun to put together. Okay, so now you have an idea of what the diagram is. This is kind of our church. It's going to be set up into really 3 sections. So let me go ahead and remove the ruin part. I don't really need that anymore. Let me go pull up a floor plan. because it's always nice to start with a reference. You turn on your grid, and I'm setting my grid at 19 by 25. This grid is just to let you know scale, and you can go ahead and put your walls together using the grid as a guide. We don't have a room tool yet, but we do have a grid, and that's going to help you to set up. So until we get that room tool, it's just going to be basically wall Tetris. And putting walls together, it's just slightly time consuming, not too bad. Let's go ahead and pull up the floor plan, because you should generally have a floor plan when you're trying to figure out what you're trying to make. So I can go ahead and just turn that diagram off for now. I don't need it. So we're making a temple, and I'm kind of basing it off of a cathedral. And a cathedral has 3 major parts, at least the one that I'm working here. And the first part, let's go ahead and pull up some paths here so you can kind of see what I'm doing here. And you're going to notice right here, this main part right here in the very entrance way, that's where your tower, your vestibules are. A vestibule is basically a room before you go into the main body, which is going to be called the nave. All right. This main part is the nave right here. And you're going to have your sanctuary. Your sanctuary is basically where the priest or priestess or high priest or whatever it is does the ceremonies that take place inside of the temple. And your sacristy is actually where the priest or priestess would prepare the services before going on to the sanctuary. And I've added in this piece right here because it's nice to have a little bit of asymmetry in your builds. I mean, it's not that you can't have perfectly symmetrical structures, but it's nice to throw in one element in the floor plan that makes it asymmetrical. So if you just remove that sacristy, it's just a very, very pretty symmetrical structure. That's why, again, I've added in this sacristy right here to make your floor plans nicer. So whenever you're putting together walls or putting together a structure, just remember, you can have the main structure be symmetrical, but throw in an asymmetrical element to kind of break up that symmetry that makes it look a lot nicer. And that is how you accentuate the asymmetry or symmetry, by adding in one of the elements, adding one of those elements. So now the sacristy, the nave, and the vestibule all stick out more because of that asymmetrical element. Now we have the general idea of what we're kind of building. You can go ahead and start putting walls on top of it. And the way that I would do walls is pretty simple. You have a wall. Let me go ahead and grab one real quick, and I'll show you just a quick demo on wall assembly. Let's go ahead and turn the layer off. Is you just place it right over the grid like this, and then you rotate it like this, and you place each one like this until you kind of make the shape that you want, and you're using that grid as a guide. So that's basically how wall assembly works. And of course, if one is just too, you can always push it in like this. So basically that's how wall assembly works. It's not complex. Just use the grid as a guide. That will totally help you out. Okay, so now that I've put down that walls, let me go ahead and remove the floor plan. We don't really need this right now, so I'll go ahead and just delete that. So here is the temple first. Now, like I said, if you have a map you're already working on and you want to break it, go ahead and just wait. We're going to get to the breaking part. That's coming up real soon. So now we want to take a look at this overall structure and pick the parts that we want to break. So you might want to say, well, I might want to break this area, might want to break this area, maybe break up this. You can decide which part you want to break. And breaking doesn't mean deleting. You can just group the whole thing. Whenever you put together the whole floor plan or the whole structure like this, group it, name it walls. That includes pillars and stairways and stairwells, steps, because that's all part of the main structure. So make sure you add in those as well, pillars and stairs. And then once it's all put together, you can group it and then select certain parts of the walls that you want to delete. Group those and label it ruin. And this way, let's say that you end up deleting a couple stamps and you don't like the way it looks. You don't have to re-add them. All you have to do is just click that group and then turn the opacity back to 0 or back to 100, sorry, because you may not want to put everything together again after deleting it. So don't delete parts of the walls. Instead, just group them and then lower the opacity. That way, if you're not satisfied, you can always just go back, put the opacity back on, and then redo the group. All right, let's go ahead and just delete these. So what I'll do is, just like I said before, I'm going to open up that wall group. And you notice there's a ruin. I have a section called ruin and a section called keep. The keep is the walls that I'm going to end up keeping that are still intact. And the ruined walls are grouped because I can just drop the opacity. And now you already have that ruin there. So now I have that ruin part, because what makes ruins interesting is that there's part of the building still exists. Otherwise, it'd just be flat surface. So having a little bit of the walls still remaining, sections of the wall remaining, really, really, really looks nice. Now, once you've gotten rid of or grouped and lowered the opacity of the walls that you want to remove, you can want to go ahead and go find the same broken walls. Now, not every wall has a broken option to it. So I went ahead and found, I used this, particularly these brick walls, because there's a broken brick stamp. And what I did is I went ahead and added, let me go ahead and take them off and you can see what I did here. Just drop the opacity. So you can kind of see what was added. I've went ahead and taken broken walls, put them along where I wanted some walls to push out. I've even added in some pillars. And if you're not sure where exactly, how you want your walls to be angled, notice that there's a curve right here. It all determines on where the force of impact. It was an earthquake. Did a pillar fall down and then collapse and then hit the wall and cause the wall to collapse? Then you would obviously want the wall to fall in the direction in which the pillar hit it. So the pillar hit this and it caused the wall to collapse. So think about force of impact, what caused it. If it's an earthquake, then probably most likely the mortar inside of this brick structure powderized because of the earthquake, and then it caused the bricks to fall over. And whichever way you want them to fall inward towards the structure, or if you want to fall outside of the structure. It's up to you how you want to decide that. All right, let's go ahead and take these broken walls. I'm going to put them all the way up to 100%. You can see them. So now we have our broken walls, and that includes your pillars. The next step is where to put rubble. Where exactly do you want to know where to put? Well, actually, let's put down rubble, and then we'll go into contrast. So let's go ahead and bring down rubble. And the way that rubble works is not too complex. Wherever a wall is collapsed, it needs to go somewhere. So if this wall has collapsed right here, there needs to be evidence of a wall being there, unless obviously it's into the story that someone took some of those bricks and carried them off for another structure. But if that's not the case, this wall needs to go somewhere. There needs to be rubble wherever the wall collapsed. So if you're seeing a section where there is no wall, that's very clearly where you're going to want to put your rubble. It just kind of makes sense, right? There's no wall here. So wherever those sections are, that don't have walls, that is where you're going to want to put your rubble. Because, hey, that wall had to go somewhere, right? Where did this wall go? Did it just fly away? Right, it didn't. So you need to show evidence that the wall collapsed. So putting down rubble. So notice those red things right there. I'm going to go ahead and turn on rubble real quick. And you can kind of see what I did here. And you're going to see where the walls collapsed at a ton of rubble. Now, the way that you put together rubble is not too complex. Let's go ahead and type in rubble, and I'll show you the best way to go about putting down rubble. Let me see if I can find, there it is. This stone right here is perfect. This is what I used. And what you do is you want to set your area. If you go up, you're going to see that there's an area right there. And the way I do rubble is I do a main pile first. There's a main pile, and then I go back to area 0, and then I start putting down individual pieces of rubble to show kind of an impact where you see it kind of falling away from the pile somewhere. That's generally how I go about doing it. Start with your large pile with your area, and then put down your individual single clicks of the rubble to kind of show the detail and the direction in which the collapse took place. So helpful to use that area option and then just leave the density at 100. It's fine where it is. So it's just first make the main body or volume of the rubble first with the area and then single clicks. So that's basically how Rubble works. Not complex, super easy. And now you know where to put it. Wherever a wall has been missing, that's where you're going to put your Rubble, right? Because it's got to go somewhere. Like I said, walls don't magically disappear, though that'd be interesting. It's a nice character, and maybe in D&D it does. Who knows? I've not heard that. Okay. Now, I'm going to go ahead and turn off that grid. I don't really need it right now. Let's turn that grid off. There we go. You got some rubble. And now I'm going to show you something about contrasting walls. So I'm going to go ahead and turn these contrasting walls on. And I'm going to do it slowly so you can kind of see what I'm doing here. If I turn this on, you're going to notice that there are some darker spots and lighter spots now in the wall. Look carefully at these walls right here. I'll go ahead and circle it so you can see it when I do it. But look carefully at this wall right here. I'm going to go ahead and turn on my contrasting wall group. If you turn it on, you'll notice that there's a darker part, a lighter part, and a medium-sized part. What we're doing is we're creating the illusion of different heights within the wall, because a wall isn't going to be just a wall that's collapsed or partially collapsed at the top. How do you show that without showing the depth of, like, this part of the wall is deeper, this part of the wall is higher up? We're going to be using contrast to do that. So let me go ahead and pull up this contrast demo real quick, and I'll kind of show you how I do this. Let me go ahead and turn off the rubble, and I'm going to show you how I do this contrast. And it's not too hard to figure out. Pretty easy stuff. So first, this is what your basic wall looks like. And what you're trying to show is this. When you look at ruins, there's parts of the wall that ascend up higher and other parts that are kind of broken like this. So look carefully at this diagram right here. This is a part of the wall where some of the brick is missing and some of the brick is still there. How is it that I would show that on the wall? Because it can be kind of difficult, right? So the way that I do that is by showing contrast. The highest point of the wall is going to be brighter. Why? Because it's higher up. It's getting hit with more sunlight. What about this middle part right here? It goes down the deepest, so it's going to be the darkest. That middle section, or this last section right here, it's a little bit higher than the deepest part, but not as high as the highest point. So go ahead and just use it, just make it a little bit darker. So now the difference is all three of these things right here are all different types of brightness. One's dark, one's a little bit dark, and the other one's brighter. Okay, so contrast is the trick to depth, and you want to make sure that when you do change the contrast, you want to make sure, or not the contrast, but the brightness, all three of those need to be at very different from each other so that they are contrasting from each other. So that's the point. You would take, instead of having one section here, you would use 3 wall sections, put them together, and then change the brightness of all of them. So that's a real easy way to show contrast to make it easier now. So remember, the farther the object is, the deeper it is, darker. If it's closer to you, make the object brighter. Super, super easy stuff. Contrasting is fantastic, and I've done it here. You'll notice that there's contrasting on this wall, contrast here, contrast along this section of the wall deeper. So that's going to be very, very helpful, as having that contrast. Let's go ahead and remove this. Let's go ahead and remove the diagram. We don't need it anymore. Or let's see here, the contrast demo. I hope that helped. Contrast is magic. Absolutely do it. It's super duper helpful, okay? Okay, let's go ahead and bring that rubble back. All right, so now we have our rubble. Looking good, looking good. Okay. Now we've done the contrast, we've done the rubble. Now we want to talk a little bit about, let's take a look what we want to do here. Let's talk about how is it that I portray roof. So the way that you want to show maybe with most structures, there's something in the top that supports the roof that's called the rafters. And the rafters is mostly made of wood. It's a lighter material, right? And it's what's holding up the roof. So how is it that I show that a roof has somehow collapsed? Or the rafters, more like, how do I show that the rafters or the A-beams that support maybe the pitched roof of this structure? It would be wooden rafters. So I throw in rafters, and what I do is you just use the wooden walls, and you're going to make them a little bit darker. I made them darker here, and I made them darker so that it would contrast against the white or the gray of the wall. If those rafters were a lighter color, then it wouldn't contrast against the whiter or grayer walls, right? So I made them a little bit darker so that they're contrast. And wherever you see those rafters, that's where the roof has collapsed, right? It's just showing that, hey, the roof has collapsed here, and here's some of the rafters that were holding up the roof have collapsed. So it's a great way to show, hey, there's some roof there. So it's nice to have and to throw those things in. If you also want to show that there's been some roof, you can throw in some roof tiles in the farm. I think it's the farmstead pack. You'll notice that there are these nice tiles right here. And there's a whole bunch of them. And I just threw down some tiles wherever there was wood and rafter, because if the rafter is collapsed, it's only makes sense that that's where you would also find those tiles, because the roof is collapsed there. So therefore, you're going to have tile as well. Okay, or if you're using something else for roofing like hay, then show that too, right? Whatever your roof is, make sure that whatever the materials, hay, wood, whatever it is, make sure you put that on the ground. And you'll notice that I've added in tiles. Again, wherever there is rafter, that's probably where it's going to be. Now, you can throw in anywhere you want. It's up to you how things collapse, how they fall apart. But for me, I'm just throwing in just a couple of these tiles just to kind of show. And you can also use broken glass as well for like showing a broken window, which is a great one. And you can throw in all kinds of broken items when we get into the details. Okay, now that we've added that, we want to go into a little bit about how is it that I show that a building, that time has passed. So one thing that's nice is that how do you know how old this building is? Did it collapse yesterday, or has it been 50 years, 100 years? How is it that I show age when putting together my ruin? And the way that I do it is overgrowth, right? It's really amazing when nature takes back these human spaces. And the way that you do that is maybe there's a tree growing in the middle. Let's say that there's a tree growing in the middle of the structure. That would kind of show that, hey, this has been here so long that a tree has been able to grow in the middle of the structure, right? Or if you want to show vines or some kind of vegetation or ivy that's reclaimed the space. So throwing in vines from the Fantasy Battlemap style is a great way to portray that, hey, this overgrowth, because time has passed or elapsed long enough to where things can grow and retake the space. So that is how you portray aging in a ruin, is by the more vegetation, then the more older it's going to look. Now, if it's something like a desert or something, then it would show that the building, it would be that the ruin has been submersed in more sand. Okay, so if let's say this was a desert, then you would want a lot of that rubble, a lot of the walls and things to be covered in sand. So you use something like clipping masks with a soft edge, so that way it looks like the sand has just fallen right over it. Okay. So whatever the environment is, if it's, let's say it's water, then most of the ruin is going to be underwater and a part of it's going to be above the water. If it's a desert, use clipping masks to put over sections of the wall and then paint whatever desert texture that you've used beneath, whatever desert texture you're using as your base. You're going to use that same texture with the same settings, and you're going to paint right over that clipping mask so it looks like that sand has gone over it. Okay, so this is how you show time over a long period of time. Okay, let's go ahead and go on to the next step. Let's throw in just some details And remember, knowing what each room is can help you to decide what details are, right? So let me go ahead and turn on the details. These are just going to be small things that you put in each room to kind of show what each room is, okay? And not just that, but also how it's being used currently, not just how it was used previously before it collapsed. So let's start in the vestibule first. I've put in a kind of a camp scene in there. You'll notice that there's a fire pit there, and there's also some logs there, showing something that you would normally show outside, like a camp. Normally in a campsite, it would be outside. It wouldn't be inside of a building. So one thing to help to give this kind of nice feeling to your building is to put a fire or a campsite within a building. This is a great way to kind of bring the outside to the inside, making it feel more like it's ruined, right? Because if the walls were all there and it was a complete building, you wouldn't need to put a fire or a camp space in there because the building itself is a structure for you to stay in, okay? So just adding that little camp scene again brings the exterior into the interior of the building, giving it a nice feel to it. Because it's the vestibule, it's the first building you walked in, I'm putting in a broken statue because, you know, like having a statue in the entrance area shows you that the building was of some kind of grandiose position. It was important in some way. It is, of course, a temple, so you're going to find statues and nice things inside of it. Only makes sense. Now, in one of the towers, I've created a bell from the pirate pack. Most of the time, towers and cathedrals or temples in the front had a bell tower to let the people of the village or the surrounding area know that church services or whatever services are beginning. So throwing in a bell that's fallen down onto the ground like that is a nice way to show that, hey, this room was a bell tower. So, hey, looks nice. And of course, because the tower is taller, you're going to notice that there's a heck of a lot more rubble. The towers are taller, so when the wall collapsed, the wall is scattered all over the ground. Okay? Okay, let's talk about the nave a little bit. That nave is basically with a seating area where people sit or stand during the church service. I've thrown in a couple items. I've thrown in a chandelier that was lighting the building a little bit, or that section of the building. So having a collapsed chandelier looks nice. You can put it anywhere you want or wherever you think lighting will need to be, but a chandelier is a nice touch. I've also thrown in another part. Remember we were talking about that campsite? I've taken something normally you would not have inside a structure, like a wagon. Normally that would be outside on a road or something like that, but putting a wagon inside a building gives it that feeling of we are outdoors. The building is partially exposed to the elements. So throwing in elements, again, like the campsite or a wagon, kind of just makes the experience like, hey, I'm outside, okay? And you can throw in all kinds of things. You want to throw blood everywhere. That's fine. If you want to make it look like this attack took place sooner or recently, make the blood at a full opacity. If you want to make it look like it's stained blood from many years, like a battle took place a while ago, then of course you can go ahead and just drop the opacity more and more. And that way it will fade it, making it look like the blood has been hit by the weather, by rain and whatnot over a period of time. So it's nice to throw that in. You can also, if you want to say that a fire took place, you can absolutely go ahead and use what's called the ash. Let me go ahead and take a look here. I believe it's called burning ash, but I just want to verify that. Yeah, right here. You can have burning ash. You can go ahead and take these and make it look like, let's just say that your players just arrived and the building is still smoldering. You can just go ahead and take this burned ash and just put it on top of things like this to make it look like a fire, like it's still happening, and throw in some smoke. Okay, but that burnt ash is a great way to make it look like, hey, the structure was burnt, maybe about 24 hours ago. It's still got the hot ashes, the coal still burning. Put some smoke going around, add some clouds to give it kind of this murky, smoky kind of feel to it. So another thing that you can kind of do to get it, because there's going to be a lot of different ways that your ruin collapsed: fire, water, tree fell down, whatever it might be, and just incorporating how the damage took place. Let's go ahead and look over some more details. I've added a statue that collapsed right here. It just fell forward. A collapsed statue here. And if you go up to this sanctuary, that's this piece right here. Of course, I've thrown in an altar that's kind of broken and collapsed. And I've put some vines growing over it as well. And finally, there's that sacristy right here, that nice asymmetrical element to break up the symmetry of your map. And I've just thrown in some crates and some barrels. Whenever you feel lost on what to decorate a room, especially a ruin, just throw in crates and barrels. I can tell you right now, crates and barrels are, they're just the stock of, I don't know what the hell to put in this room. Crates and barrels, baby. That's the stuff that you need to use. It's the go-to, because you're like, I don't really know. But to avoid from every room, just having crates and barrels in it, just remember the function of that room, and it will be easier to decorate details inside of it. Again, I've added something in each section to indicate its function, right? That bell right there to show that it's a tower, the chandelier to show it's a large hall, and of course the altar to show the sanctuary, and of course just some crates and barrels in here because it's a prepping area before you go in. So very, very helpful to know what each room is, and that way when you go to decorate it with broken items, you'll know what stamps to use. Let's go ahead and delete all that stuff. Where are we at for time? Oh, lots of time. Now that we've kind of gone through all of that, we might want to consider now doing the terrain. Now, one of the reasons why I like, when it comes to ruins, if you're starting from scratch, I actually like to do the terrain last or near the end, because you can select everything here. You want to select everything like this, and now you can just go ahead and decide. You can move it wherever you want. You can rotate it where you need to. If you're using a VTT, you can in the grid, and they allow you to rotate the grid. You can break up that weird kind of angle by just rotating it, so that way it's not perfectly vertical or perfectly lined up. So this way, if you want to have some random, like a more interesting angle instead of just perfectly 90 degrees, you can go ahead and just select everything and then group it, and then you can rotate it. And then that way, again, whatever VTT you're using, you can just rotate the grid to match with whatever it is, okay? So that's why I prefer to do it last, because if the structure is built first, and then I can go ahead and decide where I want to put all of my scenery, what kind of vegetation, my trees, things like that. That's going to be really, really helpful. So normally I would say start with terrain first. In this instance, no, actually, unless you've already built the structure and everything, like you've already got the battle map set together, you're just trying to break the building, then you don't have to worry about this part of it, okay? So let's go ahead and throw in our vegetation. Remember, I'm making it in a forest. So what I've done is I've taken a bunch of trees, and I've tried to make the trees brighter than the vines. Notice you're going to see a huge difference between the brightness of this tree and these vines right here. That's a very strange arrow. A little kind of circuitous way to get to it there, but this tree right here, look how it's brighter than the vines on that wall. Again, it's that same thing with contrast. I want these trees to seem taller than the building, so I've boosted the brightness of it so that way it looks like they're higher up. That's the trick, okay? The other trick is to also have a shadow, and I've used an object shadow. Notice the shadow that's around that, and that shadow will also help because the shadow is darker and the stamp is brighter. It's using that contrast to make the stamp look like it's higher up. Okay, so I'm surrounding it with trees because I really like the idea of nature reclaiming human spaces. So this structure is surrounded by trees, of course. And now we're going to go ahead and notice one other thing real quick, actually, that I've also put some other vegetation on the ground, these ferns right here, and I've made them darker. And I've made sure that some of them are underneath the tree. You don't want your fern to accidentally be on top of a tree because ferns grow on the ground. They don't grow on top of trees. So to show, again, a sense of depth, whatever's on the ground, make it darker and put it below things that are going to be on the top, which is going to be like trees, whether the tree is a pine or whether it's going to be some kind of deciduous tree, or I'm sorry, conifer or deciduous. It doesn't matter. Make sure that that's above whatever ground cover that you're using, ferns, grass, whatever stamp you're using, okay? Let's get to the texturing bit because we're going to do landscape now. So I'm going to stick with just grass for now. The whole thing's going to be grass. And the quick way to fill a canvas is just to use that rectangular shape. Make sure it's set to the BG layer or whatever layer that you have. Press apply. Oopsie, we're going to make sure it's set to 100%. Apply. Now at first it may be confusing because it's just so flat. What we're going to be doing now is we're going to be using a series of textures and paths to add shadow and to give a little bit more character. So let's first start with using our brick texture here. I'm going to use a brick texture to represent the ground. You can use tile or whatever texture you want, totally up to you. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to select the edgy brush because the edgy brush has these really interesting edge shapes, and so it might look nice for ruins. I'm going to turn off smooth because I want the edges to be a little jagged. And I'm going to go ahead and first apply one coat just to see what it looks like. And I think that looks okay. Now I'm going to drop the opacity because there is no soft edges. So you want to bring the opacity down quite a bit when working with the edgy brush. Okay, that looks good. Now, just like before, where do I put ground that was made by humans, a brick or tile floor, in comparison to where, let's say, grass, dirt, or rock, natural parts? Where do I know where to paint that at? Let's just go with the walls that aren't completely collapsed. Let's start with putting that ground texture, that man-made ground texture first. So wherever you see uncollapsed floor, let's go ahead and put that texture there. Just a good start. It's a good rule, kind of a nice little rule of thumb. Wherever there is some floor still, or not floor, but wherever the wall still is, go ahead and just single click, or you can go ahead and do more than single clicks. But let's start with a lower opacity and just kind of go into the areas where there already is floor. Let's go put some on the outside too. It's okay. Here, here. I think this looks good. Let's put it all along here. There's still a wall here. And of course, let's go ahead and put in a little bit of a road that kind of goes in here. So we'll throw in a little bit of road that kind of leads up to it. There we go. Let's go ahead and put it more over here. Wherever there's a wall, we'll put that section in. There we go. That kind of makes sense. There's a little bit there on that collapsed wall. That looks good. Let's go ahead and put some here. And these stairs are perfectly intact, so let's go ahead and put some there as well. There we go. Let's take a step back and take a look at it. That looks good so far. Because there's no shadowing, it kind of blends in together. Don't worry about that. We're going to get to light and shadow shortly. We're just going to paint in our texturing. Now I've went ahead and used this other texture right here, and what I want is to show that it's not just all brick. There's a section of the floor that's got some design in it. Now you're going to have to change in your advanced settings placement. You have to change the X and the Y offsets to move things to the left and to the right and up and down. So I'm going to go ahead and apply this texture right here. And what I'm going to try to do is make it to where there's a nice walkway going in between the pillars leading up to the sanctuary. Okay. And now I'm also going to use a texture. This right here is from Temple, by the way. This texture is from Temple. And this other texture right here that I'm using is from the Fae pack. And we're going to be using this to kind of decorate the sanctuary. so that there's some nice tile work underneath where the temple was, where the altar is. So we'll go ahead and just use this texture right here, and I've desaturated it, and I've also desaturated this texture so it stays within that gray. So these obviously have colors. You can change them to HSBC, whatever you want. I'm going with gray because I just want to stick with that gray theme. And gray is a neutral color, so all those greens and reds and yellows and browns and reds, all that kind of works well with that color palette. That's why I'm going with, that's why I've desaturated the walls, the pillars, and desaturated the stairs. I want that gray because it's a neutral color and it's going to work well with any colors that I put down: green, red, blue, whatever. White, black, gray. These are neutral colors. They work with any color palette that you want to choose. I've got a little bit of mix of warms and cools with the green, some cools. The warmer colors are the tile and the rafters, which is that wood. So a nice balance between the cool and the warm colors complementing each other, making it look nice. Okay, now that we've done that part, we want to go in and talk a little bit about, let's talk a little about lighting and shadows, okay? Because it's nice to have lighting and shadows. We'll throw in some more texturing. Actually, let's just finish the texturing. The last part is to take that green texture that you have, that green texture that we use to cover the whole ground, and to go into your filters and to bring the brightness down. Okay, and I'm bringing the brightness down, and I'm going to switch over to an edge or to a circle brush with the opacity down and the softness all the way up. And I'm going to go ahead and just take that texture and I'm just going to put it kind of around the edge of the walls to make it a little bit darker. And what I'm doing is, again, just adding a little bit of ambient occlusion, or not necessarily ambient occlusion, but throwing in a little bit of a darker green texture just to give it a little bit more depth, because the contrast against the light walls against this dark green texture will help to make the walls pop out a little bit more before we throw in our ambient occlusion. Now, whenever you whenever you use a texture, I always remember that you favor it immediately. If you change any of the filters or the placement of the texture, save it immediately. Because what can happen is that you might apply like 20 different textures, and then you've accidentally gotten rid of, because it's removed from the recently used. So make sure you favorite any changes that you make. Make sure you favorite it immediately, so that way you have access to it later as you're working on the map. It would be a pain in the rear to try to figure out the placement and to figure out the HSBC, making it match with the previous texture that you used. You don't have to do that if you just favorite it immediately, okay? That's super important that you favorite it. Now, I've thrown in that little bit darker around the edge there. Let's talk about shadow. Now, I'm not going to go too much. I'm not going to go into elongated shadows in this one, because elongated shadows or directional shadows, because that is a stream in itself. But I will talk a little bit about how it operates if you want it to work. Wherever your light source is, whatever direction your light source is going in, that's the direction of the shadows that you're going to be going in. So if I rotate the light source here, notice that shadow, that's going to be the direction that the shadow is going to be going in as well. Okay, notice here that I've went ahead and this is the direction that your shadows are going to be going in. So for directional shadows, it's not too complex. Whichever direction the light is showing, that's the direction in which your shadows are going to project. Okay, so it just doesn't matter wherever you want it to be. But you know, the easiest way to do shadows, though, really is just to do basic ambient occlusion and just have the sun being directly on top of us. That's the easiest way for people who are kind of starting out or are not comfortable with doing shadows. And we don't even really have things in the tool to make perfect directional shadows yet. Maybe we will when we get that room tool up. maybe, right? But for now, if you want to do directional shadows, this is basically how you would do it. Just make sure that whichever direction the light is facing, that's the direction that your shadows are also going to be going. So that's how you would do directional shadows. Again, if this is something that interests people, directional shadows, let me know and we can do an entire tutorial on that, okay? So I'm going to go ahead and throw down my ambient occlusion on my walls. Ambient occlusion, not inclusion, ambient occlusion is basically having a little bit of dark shadow along the edges of whatever structure you have to make them pop out. So, and I've used the path tool to do this. Let's go ahead and turn it on. You notice that you see these dark shadows now? It's immediately caused the walls to pop out a little bit. And all I've done is just take the path tool, just go ahead and set it to black, put the width all the way up, and go ahead and just put down, whenever you're doing a path, put it down first so you can kind of preview what it looks like. Turn that blur on. You can turn that blur all the way up if you want, like this, and now you have a path that has a black, and this is going to act as your shadow, okay? And all I did was just make sure that this black path is below the walls, so that way I'm not accidentally putting that black shadow on top of the wall. I'm putting it below the wall. And all I did was just go ahead and take that path like this and go ahead and just go underneath an object like that to make it look like there's a dark shadow. That's how easy it is. Just use ambient occlusion. Don't worry about directional shadows. Just take that black blurred path and just line it around wherever your walls are at. Okay, that's it. And then that way it's below the walls, and that way you're just doing simple ambient occlusion to make the walls pop out. And that way you don't have to worry about making a directional shadow. This would just mean that the sun is at high noon, just coming down, and that way it's not that complex. This is optimal lighting for your players, but that's really the quickest way to go about doing it. It's just using the path tool to create ambient occlusion to make those walls pop out. So now you notice that where you put the ambient occlusion is wherever you want the wall to pop up. So because the wall has collapsed right in that collapsed sections, you notice that there is no ambient occlusion in this section, right? Because it's collapsed, right? It's collapsed. Players can walk into here or walk out of here in that section. So wherever there's height, or you want to show height, ambient occlusion is the way to do it, and the path tool is the way to go about doing that. Now you can do additional shadowing. If you feel like that's not enough, you can take the black color and make sure you bring the opacity down, because if it's at full black, then it's just going to be completely missing, right? You want to see some of the texture underneath, some of that stone texture there. So bring the opacity down. A good place to generally put it is about 30. And what I like to do is, if you want to show that there's even more height there, just take a black texture or black color, and then just use a couple strokes to make it a little bit darker. So if you just want to show a little bit more depth, use that black color on top of the ambient occlusion to give it a little bit more depth to it, okay? So that's really the secret, is just throw in the ambient occlusion and then throw in the shadow that way. Now, of course, if you do have some things that are in a wall, notice here that this log right here and this log right here, because there's a shadow there are two things that you can do. You can just use the path tool to do it, or you could select those logs and bring the brightness down. Really, the best way is just to use a path tool. So if I go back to the path tool like this, let's go to pure black, and we'll put the blur up. Let me just apply it to make sure that looks right, because I want to make sure that that looks right. So I'll just go ahead and put the path on top like that, and now the path is on top of the logs to make it look like they are inside of the shadow. There's multiple ways that you can go about it, but the path tool is probably the best way to go about doing that, okay? Like if I wanted to have this bell have a little bit of shadow underneath it to make it look like, there you go. Just put that beneath or on top a little bit to give it some shadow. So showing shadow is not too complex. Just put it down underneath to give it a little bit more contrast to make it pop up. So let's just step out and take a look. We've got about 10 minutes left. Let's add in the last bit. Because it's shadow, we could do a couple things here. We could use filters to show a couple things. Let's start with a light source first. And we're going to take a big light and we're going to put it just right here in the center like this. I'm going to make sure it's at layer +5, and I'm going to bring the opacity down just a little bit. And that way we have a little bit of natural light from the sun kind of coming down, and it also kind of helps to add some more contrast. It's brighter right there and therefore darker, making that darker sections where the ambient occlusion is to make it pop out more. You could use a filter as well. You could use a spotlight, but I want to use, the spotlight is white, and I want to use warm yellow colors. And I like that too because I've made the tips of the trees kind of brighter, and that's around the same yellowish color. As you can see, some of the trees have that yellowish kind of highlight on it, and that's very useful as well. So throwing on that light on top is very, very helpful. Let's also go over some filters that we're going to be using. Let's go ahead and turn them all off. The first one that I've done is use a vignette, and what I've done with the vignette is I've made sure that the vignette is actually a layer below the trees. So if I push the vignette up, you'll notice that it will diminish some of those trees, and I don't want that. I actually want the vignette to be beneath the trees because I don't want to diminish the lighting, but I want to add additional shadowing beneath the corners where my trees are. So like I said, just pushing this below one layer causes some shadows to go around it to frame it a little bit, but doesn't actually obscure or put the shadow on top of the trees because I don't want that vignette to show up on the trees. The next thing is to throw in a color, and because there's so much cool and greens in here, I'll throw down a red sky filter that's going to make some of the reds kind of pop out a little bit more. Let's just allow that filter to pop up 1 second. So it's kind of added in some reds here. And I kind of like, it's going to make some of the red of those, the red of the tiles and the red of the rafters, wherever there's browns, woods, kind of makes it, give it a nice warmer tone to it, a more natural feeling. And then I'm going to throw in clarity as well to kind of make all the stamps a little bit more clear and to make the lights pop out a little bit more. Okay, so it looks nice there. Now, if you want to have a little bit more browns in, you can throw in some dirt if you want, and that's not a bad idea. We can go in and just take a dirt texture, and let's just go ahead and use the edgy brush at a lower opacity like before, and you can obviously throw in some dirt if you want. Obviously, wherever there's rubble, clearly that dirt kind of keeps some of the grass from growing. So if you throw down maybe just a little bit of dirt in right here, just throw in some dirt right here, maybe throw in some dirt right here, wherever maybe some rubble collapsed. And if you want, you can throw in some dirt just wherever there's not any ferns or vegetation. Throw in some dirt, and that will add in some more browns. Makes it a little bit nicer. And whatever it is, if it's sand or if it's snow or whatever it might be, that dirt is going to bring in some more of those reds, that warmer tones. Take advantage of that red filter, and so throw in maybe some warmer textures to take advantage of that. There we go. I think that looks good. Let's just check over the process. We did it all. We did floor plans, we did walls, we broke the walls. And then we removed some walls using opacity, and then we just replaced them with broken walls. We added rubble wherever a wall has collapsed, because bricks that create a wall don't just fly off. Either they're stolen or taken to work on another structure. So you make sure you show wherever there's no wall, it had to go somewhere. Have that rubble strewn all over the place. If you want to show where roof collapse, add in your rafters. Wood walls work great, and tile. If it's not tile, then hay, whatever you're using to show your roof. Then you're going to want to put on your terrain. And then remember, showing age on the wall is by throwing vegetation on. And you can even throw in more vegetation in the structure itself. Notice that there's no ferns inside the structure. If you wanted, you could totally take a fern and put its growing somewhere in the building to kind of make it feel more like things are overgrown. I used vines, but you can throw vegetation inside the building as well. So if I wanted, I could take this fern right here, and wherever there's a lot of green patch, then put that there, obviously. So there's a lot of green patch here, so I'll just go ahead and put them down, put the vegetation in where there's a lot of green grass, one there. So if you want, you can throw in more growth. So I took it out. I didn't put any in for a specific reason, because there's a lot of those already, and I'm trying to make a clear distinction between the inside and the outside without but at the same time also including some vegetation inside. Okay, so remember, the age thing is just about how much vegetation, how much growth has taken over. Okay, I think that's it. Yep, that's all. The process works pretty good. Just go through this process to make it easier for yourself. Again, if you're just breaking a pre-existing map, then you can just skip a lot of the first couple steps because you've already got a building set up. Just make sure that if you want to break a building that you already have, make sure that you select all the walls, all the stairs, everything that's part of the structure besides the details. Delete all the details inside the building, or group them and then just drop the opacity to 0, label it details, and then go in and select all the walls and sections, group that, and then that way you can work on breaking whatever structure you have without accidentally selecting something outside of the structure, like ferns or whatever, okay? So go through this process and it'll be a lot easier for you to put things together. It's just fun to break things. Who doesn't like a little bit of demolishing, right? Okay, well, that's it for this stream. Thank you so much for watching, everyone. We can kind of go over the next stream that we're going to be covering. If you want, I can go ahead and save this as well. If you like this map, I'll save it and make it clonable. So let me just save this. I'm going to save this so that way you can use it if people want to use it for themselves. I try to make sure that whatever maps we put together in streams, that people can use them. We're going to go ahead and use the last few minutes just to go over what's coming up next. I think the next stream is how to create realistic water. It's going to be part 2. In part 1, we did rivers and the ocean. For this next one, we're going to be doing mangroves and lakes. I absolutely love mangroves. They're fun, so we're going to cover that. And we're going to cover lakes as well. So that's super exciting. Go ahead, and when this video goes onto YouTube, I'll make sure to put the clonable map, the finished clonable map, in the video description on YouTube, so that way if you want to use it, you can. Or I can just post it in the chat somewhere, or somewhere in the in Discord. Make sure that you join our Discord because it is amazing. So I'm super excited about next week's stream. Oh, go ahead. I think that's it. Yeah. All right. Well, hey, thanks everyone. Thanks so much for joining. I'm looking forward to seeing you all next week. Please stay safe and healthy. Thank you so much for being here. And I will see you all next week. Okay. Merry map making, everybody.